Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors. Dr. Allen chats with successful investors exploring their journey from setback to triumph. Through this window, we glimpse the truths that inspire our guests to invest abundantly and flourish in all areas of life. And now your host, Dr. Allen.
Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, where we delve deep into the lives of our successful guests to learn the secrets of thriving to flourish abundantly in all areas of life. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. Today's guest is a passive real estate investor, syndicator, co-sponsor, and former technology leader. His company, Madison Investing, has co-sponsored deals totaling more than 5,000 units for more than $600 million. He invests in syndications as an LP and actively leads Madison Investing alongside his co-founder and wife, Jennifer. In November 2019, he retired from his lucrative technology career. Now he is focused on spending time with loved ones and growing Madison Investing by helping passive investors achieve their goals. Welcome, my guest today, Spencer Hilligoss.
Alan, thank you so much for the invite. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I'm pleased to have you, Spencer. And congratulations on reaching your goal of early retirement. I know that must feel very, very good.
It does.
I'm sure you worked for it very diligently. I'd like to get to know my guest here by getting to know the child within. And as I've said many times on the podcast here, I was listening to a motivational speaker many years ago, and I don't even remember his name. But one thing I do remember that he said is that to know the adult, you really have to know the child within me. And so let's take a trip back to your childhood, and if you can, bring to mind a memorable experience that as you look back on it, you go, yeah, that really was a formative experience in my life.
Yeah, and I want to also start with kudos, because I think that so much of doing the right business and making the right investments, it comes down to the people you choose to work with. And I think that it's rare to find hosts and shows that actually focus on this type of thing this deeply. So kudos to you, Alan, on that. And I think
Spencer, could you talk into your mic there as you turn away from it? We're losing your volume there.
There we go. Okay. So, going back to my upbringing. So I grew up in the Bay Area, California. My parents, it's interesting. I don't share this very often, but since you asked, my dad, he was actually one of the top performing residential real estate brokers in the United States back in the 90s. And prior to that, though, he got into real estate, but he was a carny. His family were carnival folk. So you probably don't hear that too often. But my dad was in that business for a lot of his adult life before he got into real estate. And so I only got a little exposure to that. But as he made that transition and our family reaped the benefits of a high flying real estate brokerage kind of career and all the benefits financially that come along with that, I was pulled in to also observe and see what happens inside of a thriving real estate business, right? And so I got that exposure until flash forward a couple of years later, and my family went through some incredibly tough times when the business, essentially my dad's business, shrank. And it shrank because when I was this is around high school, I was a teenager, my younger brother, Justin, he passed away from pediatric cancer, and it was a long time ago. But he had a brief, beautiful life. And then what happens typically after those types of things is you see the parents, it triggers a divorce for a variety of reasons, but that's pretty common. And so that happened, a bunch of other rough stuff. Business had to downsize, our lifestyle had to downsize. So I went through all that, and I was observing that and going through that, as a young adult. And so going into school, in college, went to University of Colorado, moved out of the California area, and ended up living in Colorado for a number of years. But I bring all that up, Alan, because watching that whole experience end to end I didn't realize, number one, all the stuff on real estate that I was soaking up and entrepreneurship that I was soaking up just by being there, and some of this stuff starts to come out now. I feel like I can almost hear my dad's voice coming out in negotiations sometimes. And I'm like, where did that come from? Somewhere in my brain it's in there. And then on the other hand, the downfall or the shrinking of my family's livelihoods, it left such a profound mark on me about what it means to have a stable, predictable financial picture for your family. And I have 2 kids of my own now. I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old boy. And they're a blast, but also I sit there and I wonder, like, what if that were to occur to us somehow? Like, what if that were to occur? How could I avoid financial fallout, right? Of some type. What if I had to stop working, right? And so perhaps later we can talk more about that transition to quitting my day job. But I would just say 13 years in a technology business in Silicon Valley didn't feel very stable and predictable to me, despite the fact that a lot of people from the outside would say, wow, you made great money in that business. Wow, you had such a great rocket ship leadership career. The experiences of my childhood made me appreciate things like financial offense and financial defense. And that's literally the way that Jennifer, my wife and my co-founder in our business, that's the way we talk about it, this, financial offense and financial defense. And I take those principles, very closely to heart because of the experiences I went through when I was younger.
Well, that's interesting that, a lot of the worst things in our lives can sometimes be the things we learn the most from and help us really to become the successful people that we ultimately do. Yeah, that had to be some very difficult times for you as a young person, and clearly has left a mark on you. Because, I know that a lot of people would have looked at your career in Silicon Valley and go, well, you just don't really have any reason to be concerned about your family's health and well-being. They're well taken care of.
That's right.
And yet you knew differently that things could change. So it sounds to me like you decided really early on in your career that you were going to build a foundation beyond just beyond your career and what that could bring you. Is that correct?
It's funny you asked that. It's like in hindsight, the raw materials, if you want to call them that, were there. The notion, like the suspicion that there's this financial playbook that it's unwritten around Silicon Valley, and I succumbed to it as well, right? I mean, I looked at how so many people, young professionals, I was one of these folks too. You leave college, you go into the local business or the sexier looking business of tech companies, and you're basically chasing the Silicon Valley lottery, which means you want to get early stage equity in a potentially high flying big exit, Google or Facebook. And 9 times out of 10, I mean, actually the odds are quite a bit lower than that. Like it's just not going to go the way you want. And you're not going to get that big exit to absolve all your financial sins. So I was thinking about that. I went through that early in my career. I was chasing that, but I always knew, I had an inkling like, I really enjoy writing. I want to be an author. I had an inkling of, I used to play, and I still do play some guitar now mostly for my kids, but I used to play in things like punk rock and metal bands, right? Like, so all of these things were things I wanted to spend passion time on, but financially, I very, very keenly was aware the whole time that getting this really great lucrative income from these tech companies was not sustainable, because what happens if I get hit by a bus or something tragic, right? What happens if I can't provide income for my family and our livelihood? So it was there. It wasn't until 2015 when I was at my 4th software company, and I had an infant son, as our first of the 2, and I was grinding harder at my day job in my tech. It was a very hot startup, quote unquote, right? It was very, very good valuation, like $1 billion valuation. They call that a unicorn now. And I was so burnt out, and I was so stressed, and I was working 80 hours, 100 hours a week at that time. And I just realized this is not sustainable, right? That's what lit the fuse for me as an adult, truly, to go and say, let's put pen to paper. We need an alternative strategy. And then once I got nudged by a mentor of mine into a company called LendingHome, and I got there early, and they are now the biggest fix and flip single family home lender in the country. And so when I joined them, they were doing 150 loans per month. I was tasked with going in and kind of turning around and then scaling their origination groups, their loan origination groups. And by the time we left, it was a $4 billion loan origination function. But in that first year, I had every coworker saying, you should go become a flipper. You should go become a flipper. And I was like, I don't want to become a flipper. I could barely swing a hammer, man. I don't want another job either. I don't hate my day job. I want a different plan that helps us build something truly sustainable, predictable, passive income, all that good stuff. And so that's where the real pen to paper, the real plan, the real pivot, whatever you want to call it, occurred. Was when I was in that early days of LendingHome, seeded by an earlier stage startup that I was at that was just burning me out, and it really made me realize we got a different plan.
So you had mentioned a mentor had led you into that particular business there. Was this mentor instrumental in helping you to see that this was not going to be the end game, or how did you come to the realization that passive investing in real estate was the route for you?
I wish I could say there was a brilliant master plan, Alan. In hindsight, I knew that, and I had conversations, of course, with my dad. He didn't really do too much of the investing stuff when he was a broker back in the 90s. And I was always a little bit kind of wondering about that. Like, why didn't you do it more? Why didn't you tell me to get into it, right? And I'm sure he did. But when it came to making the switch to actually invest our own capital, because we'd done well enough, we weren't exactly like, we're not Warren Buffett, but we weren't totally despondent. So we wanted to start investing, and we bought the way most people do when they first start real estate investing. We went out and bought a duplex locally because we weren't quite comfortable enough to pull the trigger on something that's out of sight, long distance investing style. So we did that. It was not the best use of our dollar, right? And we also found out that it was, well, as you already know very well, Alan, like when you're investing in a pricey market, the cash flow that you're going to get is not that great relative to if you were to invest in some of the more cash flow friendly markets. So San Francisco Bay Area, not the best place to do that. So, but we spent a whole summer with our infant son in the car driving around and trying to find this one duplex or a 3 or 4 unit. And we finally bought one. We very quickly realized, wait, we should go look out of state. We went and bought a bunch of turnkey properties, single family turnkey properties in the Midwest, because we finally got comfortable with investing long distance. And then we realized, wait, our goal is to get financially free, based on how we define that. And it's going to take too long. Like, we were not satisfied with the numbers that we saw. We were looking like a 15-year time horizon. And I know for some people that might sound impatient. I think there's good and bad versions of impatient. I think this is a good version of impatient, I'd like to think. And that just means 15 years wasn't going to do it. So how do we get to true financial freedom within half that time, like 7 years? So that's how I found my way into multifamily. And I read 24 books, listened to 400 podcasts just like this one. Became quite obsessed with it, frankly. And then started working with a coaching program, and now I think I'm on my 4th coaching program now, where it helps to have other people that you can work alongside with in this business, because there's a lot to learn by yourself, and it can be very isolating. So it was a critical move to stumble through those single family small stuff until we got to the bigger stuff, and found all the awesome benefits that come along with going into the bigger properties.
Well, that is interesting. A whole lot of things to unpackage there. But one thing, I'm personally curious. You were in California, and your parents were going through a divorce, or had just recently divorced. This was close to the time that you were graduating from high school, right?
Yeah, it was, roughly. Yep.
Roughly that. And so you ended up going to college halfway across the country. Actually, Colorado is where I'm from. So yeah, I'm real familiar
Nice.
with Boulder. So, uh, but how did you, at this time of great turmoil, how did you end up uh, deciding that I'm going to go to college halfway across the country here rather than, I mean, California's got some fabulous universities. So
It does.
how did you end up going to University of Colorado?
Thanks for being the first person to ever ask that on a podcast. I really appreciate that. It's a tough thing, I'm sure you've been through your own challenges in your own life, Alan. And I think every person has their kind of crosses to bear. But I would say that one of the things, if there were to be a list of things I was ever most conflicted by in my entire life, it would be that.
Hmm.
And it would be, it should, it's a tough thing to decide to go, many, many, many miles away when someone that you love, like a sibling, is going to potentially pass away because of a terminal illness. And the feedback from my parents, which I very much appreciated at the time, and I think it was the right move and the right guidance, and I still believe that to this day, was it would be a shame for you to lose out on this opportunity, Spence, because because of the fact that you wanted to stay close. We think you should go and do that, and we think that you should go. And I had visited that campus. I think the campus in many ways sells itself a lot of times, as you know. But that said, I hadn't lived outside California, and I was, I do have to pick on my Californian brethren. Whenever people out of state make fun of Californians, it's 100,000% deserved, and it's because we are jaded and we don't understand. And I think until you go live somewhere else, you really need to get out of your area and get more perspective. And so I cherish the perspectives I've gained from both travel as well as living outside California. Not to say Colorado is, Boulder has plenty of similarities to certain parts of California, of course, but I would just say that that was a key decision. It was a key decision to go out and build those relationships, to kind of find your footing. I think we won't turn this into how I parent, because I only have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. I haven't gone full cycle, if you want to call it that, on raising a child until they're independent. But I think most people should leave their hometown to go and live somewhere else. And if they can do that during college, great. If they've never done that, they are not only missing out, I think they are stunting their growth. And so that would be a couple of the reasons my parents nudged me to do that. And I am so pleased I did.
Well, I totally agree. I think if you can go out, if you can go to college outside of the area that you have grown up in, I always think it's a very good idea to do that. But why did you choose the University of Colorado out of all the institutions in the country?
I thought it was, proximity. So it's still pretty easy flight, back home, pretty cost effective. It's also just frankly, like, it's going to sound simple and immature, but just, I love snowboarding. So that certainly helps. I think, I went in originally in computer science. And so I went in computer science because I was doing some what I thought was pretty good programming in high school. I'm sure that it's not that amazing in the big picture compared to some of the badasses that are out there. But I was doing like AP computer science classes in high school, and eventually I got to college and I looked around the room and I remember the distinct moment sitting in a class, year 1, computer science foundational class, and I looked around and everyone seemed very, very into it, and I was sitting there going, I think I need more time to snowboard. I mean, I just being candid. Like I was not mature enough to understand how to be a great student. I was not a great late high school student, and I was certainly not a good student in my first 2 years of college until I found passions in the sense of, frankly, some people think sociology is a mail-it-in major. I took it very seriously. And so eventually I got sociology and business, minor in business, and those eventually resonated with me more. These days I have like a pretty disciplined, and I have an incredible work ethic. So those are some strengths I got more from my dad than college. But I would say that for all those, the question you asked about why Boulder and kind of why the focus, it's a beautiful place to live with a bunch of really awesome relationships to be built, big school, big relationship opportunities to be built. You kind of find who you are a lot of times when you go out and you meet all these folks. And that is what I look at as the primary education I received there, was like great relationships. I still have today great socialization. I mean, not just partying. We're talking about, great meaningful interactions and debates and all those things. So I'm very thankful for all that.
Yeah. Well, you just brought up something else that I find interesting and surprising, is that you majored in sociology.
Yes.
With a minor in business. That is an unusual major for people in this industry. Lots of people in finance, lots of people in IT, lots of engineers. You're the first sociology major that I have spoken to. So talk to me about having a background in sociology and working in the high-tech field and ultimately going into real estate. How did that all come together?
That's a dangerous question, Alan, because it's way too fun. Let me think about that. In the corporate world, and I use that term very generally, meaning if W-2 world, big company, small company, if you worked in any company of size, then you may have been exposed to different personality tests, right? And assessments, whether it's Myers-Briggs, whether it's the DISC-M, whether it's any of these other things, and strengths finders, right? So all these different assessments, and I bring those up first to answer this question, because if you looked at of the dozens of times I've taken these various forms of assessments, if you look at what mine says, it says that I have two basically key superpowers, and this is not something I go around and brag about, but you asked a very specific, interesting question, so I'm just going to give you a direct answer. I am not the person who's going to be able to be the deepest quant. Like, I'm good at spreadsheets, I'm good at analysis, I know how to look at real estate very clearly, but I'm not the guy who wakes up in the morning excited to underwrite. But on the other side, my two superpowers are I'm extraordinarily good at listening and observation. That's number one. And I am very skilled and just not naturally focused on synthesizing patterns out of large amounts of observation and information. And so I spot patterns really well. And so those two things I didn't learn about until years later from navigating a leadership career as a guy who's a very firm introvert by default. And I went through a 13-year leadership and management career, somehow half of which was in sales of all things. I think people tend to bucket extroverts and people who just naturally want to go have endless conversations and be braggadocious and be loud into those types of work. Couldn't be more incorrect, right? And so I went through all that, and that career of 13 years at 5 different companies, and hiring hundreds of people and coaching them up as as leaders of their own and individual contributors and all that. And I thank my lucky stars every day that I decided to go with a major of sociology, coming on directly back to your question, because so much of success comes down to understanding a person and their motivations and their intent, and ultimately, how do you find alignment or not? And I think in business and in real estate, man, people love to cling to the concrete. They love to cling to a pro forma to decide on a deal. And that's why every single time a person asks me, how do you decide if an investment is good? And if someone else is managing it, such as passive investing, my direct answer is stop looking at the deal first. The first thing you look at, and I put like 70 to 80%, speaking very roughly, not quantitatively, but roughly, 70, 80% of a good deal is based on who is driving the ship. If it's a syndicated deal, as an example. Mm-hmm. And that's just people, man. That's just understanding the person. That's understanding their history. That's understanding their past decisions. That's understanding how they intend to resolve challenge. The single most important question, I would argue, in our decisioning criteria for working with a new sponsor that we're going to join with in the GP, in the general partnership team on a syndication investment, is something it sounds nerdy and corporate, but I call it failure response. And what I mean by that is, has this person been through a incredibly kick you in the teeth style of challenge? Like, have they really been challenged to their core? Maybe ideally that's on a real estate investment of some type, right? Because if we're considering an investment, if they have never done, let's say, a capital call out of necessity to go back to their investors, their passive investors, their LPs, and say, you got to put more money in this project, otherwise you're not getting any of it back. If they don't have that, fine. Happy to go look further back. Maybe they're an entrepreneur. Maybe they're a serial entrepreneur. Maybe they have had a brutally challenging period of time in their entrepreneurship career, like in tech. This happens all the time. One of the hardest things you could possibly do is have to wind down something that previously was your dream, right? And like you hear this from founders in tech all the time. They put their heart and soul, a lot of their money, a lot of their time into building a company to ultimately have to wind it down and compassionately let go of the entire workforce. That is a story I will listen to any day of the week and take as a replacement if someone is trying to get into doing real estate right now. And I want to make sure their failure response can treat the capital that people invest responsibly and make good decisions under duress, right? And so that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I just wanted to make sure I gave some specificity to it.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's a response I don't think I've ever heard. And I truly appreciate it. I feel very much the same way. If people have not learned how to deal with their setbacks and their failures, I don't know how they can call themselves a success, because I mean that's just life. I mean, you have to learn how to deal with that, and if you don't, you never are really going to be a true success. It's just been a wonderful conversation, Spencer, and an extraordinarily surprising conversation. Not one I was expecting. Unfortunately, we are running out of time here, and there are so many more things I would love to discuss with you, so I hope we can have you back on the show in the not too distant future here. Before we close out the program, I do have one last question that I ask most all of my guests. Before I go to that, tell our viewers and listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, two ways. We have a website, so MadisonInvesting.com. Yeah, and on that page, you'll find, blog content, other interviews and just good educational stuff. But if you want to join our passive investing program, there's a button on there. You just click that, and you will have to speak to me. I promise I will not be, I won't bite if you actually want to talk to me and join our list. The other way is on LinkedIn. So I'm actually very active on LinkedIn. I post every day. Sometimes it's educational, sometimes it's silly, just trying to make sure people can help get through the day and get motivated. So reach out. I'm happy to connect.
Okay. Well, my last question is, when you come to the end of this life's journey, how do you want your epitaph to read?
Man, I love these questions. I really do. He gave, I don't know something more eloquent on the top of my head, but I would just say that he was authentic and he gave. And what I mean by that is, there's so much taking that occurs in the world. And earlier in my young life, I think we all have our moments of selfishness. And I try not to live with regret, but I would say I try to live with a true abundance mindset these days and walk the walk on that. And that means giving without expectation of anything in return. And so I would like to think that people know that I am always listening when they're speaking with me and that I give.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing your life with us and your experiences. It has been a pleasure to have you, Spencer, and I look forward to future conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Really appreciate the invite.
Thank you for tuning in to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. Steed Talker Capital works with both new and established investors nationwide, creating opportunities to flourish in all areas of life. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures great and small flourish abundantly. For resources to enhance your well-being through multifamily real estate investment, connect with us online at capital.steedtalker.com.